easy to make errors about what one's own judgment is, never mind errors about what court judgments are. Recently, the Constitutional Court looked at a case which Judge Davies wrote a judgment in the High Court. In the High Court, it was determined that people should be allowed to smoke marijuana and to grow it for their personal use as long as it was within their private dwelling house. The Constitutional Court took a slightly different approach, and some say that the approach is more liberal, but in other ways it's much more restricting. Because the court said that you could grow dagga cannabis marijuana for your personal use in a private space, and you could smoke it or take it in a private space. The words private space are quite problematic if you look at what clarity is gained from them, because they're quite obscure words. I think it was Joe Rogan who recently live streamed himself with Elon Musk smoking marijuana, and in doing so there weren't really many consequences except to the share price of Tesla. But if a South African were to live stream themselves smoking the drug, would it still be a private space? What if they were to photograph themselves? What if they were to video themselves? What if someone else were to do so? It's still a private space if other people are there. For instance, if someone who's smoking marijuana invites their friend and their friend smokes. Now the court judgment says that they could grow marijuana for their own use. Private use, their own use. But can they grow it and then give to their friend? Or is that a violation? You then have further issues with the decision, and they involve matters such as commercium. Marijuana has not been put into commercium. You cannot sell or buy it. That's illegal. And there's still the presumption that if you have a certain amount of marijuana on you, that if it's an amount which does not justify private use, then you might well be convicted of having it in order to be a dealer. So the person who's growing marijuana for themselves and for a friend might be deemed to be violating the law and might be arrested. The person who videos themselves taking it might be arrested. There's also the old-fashioned intoxicated driving part of the National Road Traffic Act, which says that if you are under the influence of an intoxicating liquid or certain blood alcohol ranges of alcohol, or if you're under the influence of a drug with a narcotic effect, something like marijuana that is, if you're caught behind the wheel of a car or caught operating such a vehicle, you can be arrested for that because it's a criminal act. There's also bylaws, which every different municipality has its bylaws, but generally speaking, with the exception of some DA municipalities, almost every municipality's bylaws are the same bylaws. With the DA ones and with some other municipalities, you have some unique bylaws, but by and large they're the same. And there's a bylaw against public intoxication. And it's intoxication either with liquor or with narcotics. And so if you are found to be high, having smoked it in private, or use it otherwise in private, and then go into public, you might find yourself at the mercy of the Metro Police. So again, it's a bit more complex than media would portray it. So you can have private use, not private dwelling house. The Constitutional Court acted as though that's expanding it, though it is expanding it, but it's creating less clarity. And then there's these other issues which emerge with it. There's also a recent thing going around on Facebook. It's this picture of a directive of the Limpopo Police, the provincial head of Limpopo's policing, signs it, and it's directed to other police officials in Limpopo, and it says, that they are only to arrest people for dealing in marijuana or in having more than 3 kilograms. Now classically, before it was overruled as a standard, you would have about a matchbox of marijuana being the equivalent of having it for dealing. The court, in the Constitutional Court decision, has not set an amount which would be the limit for personal possession, and 3 kilograms is quite a bit. But the thing about that 3 kilograms amount is, firstly, if it is true, the picture, then it's a police directive, and police directives can change at any time. And secondly, it's only for Limpopo province. It's not for every single police. And that's quite something. And Becky clearly has said that marijuana is a gateway drug and he wants to crack down on it. There is some talk about maybe having the government taxing marijuana now that it's been sort of legalized at the back door, but nothing's come of that yet. So right now it's a bit like what the Democrats in America said of the Affordable Health Care Act, that we need to pass this law in order to find out what's in it, which is quite a dangerous thing to do. And that's what the court's done. They've made judgments, but the judgment's not very clear. And the only way we're going to know what's actually in it is when precedents begin being set, where people are either arrested and sent to jail, or arrested and acquitted. So it's a sort of clarity by prison, essentially, that we'll gain to learn what the law actually says. The court also gave Parliament about 24 months to amend the law to allow for personal growing of, personal cultivation of marijuana and for people to smoke it in private. It will be interesting to see how the courts deal with it until then, and how the courts deal with whatever Parliament comes up with within 24 months. There's also the question of judicial overreach, and with any right you have, for instance, you have a right to your bodily integrity, let's say, that right, or your right to free movements, any sort of right you have, whether a human right or a right in terms of the Constitution, it often gets limited on a daily basis. You commit a crime, you get arrested. You attack someone, they might shoot you. So your rights can be limited. And if I were to shoot you in self-defense, for instance, you might have a situation where you have been shot and it's authorized by the state because I'm found innocent, and as it's found to be self-defense. So you have a situation then where the state has indirectly applied a death penalty of sorts. The way in which you determine whether or not a right has been violated is you firstly look and you see if the right's been violated, and rights are pretty vague when it comes to constitutional rights. So then you look at the limitations clause, which has a whole lot of different factors to look at whether or not a law is reasonable. And you're looking at that specific law. You're not looking at all of the other laws. Except in this marijuana case, the court looked at marijuana, looked at alcohol, and used rather bad science to determine that marijuana wasn't dangerous. Now, there has been a Harvard study which says that marijuana does not cause schizophrenia, but when you're looking at studies, you don't just look at one or other study or they can come up with any result you want. You look at the meta-studies and the longitudinal studies, both of which find a direct link between schizophrenia and marijuana. It has an effect where it triggers marijuana, and varieties such as skunk trigger it at much greater amounts than older varieties of marijuana, according to the research, so that's something like 4 times more. Marijuana also, if you're under the age of around 26, when your brain has fully developed, the reason why marijuana has an effect on our brain is it interfaces with some of the natural parts of the brain. And the cannabinoid or something type of segments of the brain. And if you take marijuana, it can prevent your brain from developing. It can slow down your intelligence. It can slow down your processing speed. It can change a lot of different things. It can affect your memory. and it can affect your fluid or general intelligence, your IQ essentially. So it has many effects which can be negative. And about 50% of accidental deaths and murders, and natural deaths that is, are occurring with a combination of intoxication and behavior which often leads to the type of unfortunate circumstances that occur. So there are very good public health reasons internationally for banning marijuana. And you also have a very big problem if your population's intelligence levels going down in a democracy. So if you have a drug which affects intelligence, as marijuana does, and your democracy, it allows people to be more easily influenced than they otherwise would have. And schizophrenia is a very serious health problem. You also have a correlation between people smoking marijuana and their careers not really succeeding anymore in life. And the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatry of America, has this list of these tons and tons of medical conditions caused by marijuana. And it's very well researched, and all of the latest research just about tends to suggest that marijuana is quite dangerous. So the court decision possibly could have actually been an overreach. It could have been that the judgment was not in fact doing what the court is empowered to do, but doing what Parliament is supposed to do within separation of powers classically or within the South African Constitution. So you have that sort of situation emerging where you might have an overreach which might be declared so in about 20 years or so. And that again creates some concern and some problems. So with the judgments, you have an unclear judgment which will only be clarified through people actually going to jail or not. And you have unclear circumstances in which something can be done. You also have a situation where something which is dangerous has been legalized, and people will often compare marijuana to alcohol, and they'll say, well, alcohol is intoxicating. But there's a reason why, for instance, the National Road Traffic Act only bans certain amounts of blood alcohol levels. And that's because alcohol isn't instantly intoxicating. It has many benefits to health. It's incorporated in all sorts of rituals going back thousands of years. In fact, through much of human history, water was dangerous to drink, so people would drink beer, and the beer would give them the fluids they needed. Also, older varieties of beers were much more nutritious, and it was often the only intake of nutrition that someone would have in a day would be a beer. So alcohol has a more different type of history with humanity. It's not cut and dry, it's not all this clear sort of thing. With marijuana, it's much less so. And while alcohol can be associated with health problems for some people when taken in excess or taken when someone is premature, the effects of marijuana on the brain go right up until the age of 26 and beyond in some instances, and with some effects of it. So overall, it's a vague decision, it's a difficult decision, and it's a decision which doesn't give us too much clarity, and you're very likely to see quite a lot of people going out and possibly buying parts of marijuana plants to grow them or sharing them or any of those things. They might end up going to jail. You might then see people videoing or photographing themselves in private while taking it. You might see them go to jail. You might have a situation where you don't know what private is, how many people are in a room, what constitutes private. Is the door meant to be locked? What's private? And then you also have, well, you can't have children having the drug. It's been banned for them, but the effects on development continue beyond children. And when an adult is severely addicted to marijuana and they have children, often the children also take the drug, just as with alcohol, children will often take it. But the effects of alcohol are much smaller than the effects of marijuana. So it's a very different beast, so to speak.